For people that have never experienced an abusive relationship, it might be really confusing as to why an abuse victim would need to remind themselves why they should not go back to the relationship. It might seem obvious. Of course, you're not going to go back to a relationship with somebody that's hurt and abused you. But for somebody that's actually recovering from an abusive relationship, this is not so cut and dry. There are many reasons that we can be very, very tempted to return to the relationship or to engage with the person that has abused us. In this video, I'm going to go over several reasons that we might feel very tempted to return or re-engage in the relationship. And I'm also going to go over some good points to keep in mind to keep you from going back. Welcome to Looking Behind the Mirror, where we explore narcissism and take our lives back as we make sense out of nonsense. As a quick disclaimer, everything I say is based on my opinions and my personal experiences. I'm not a professional, and if you're really struggling, I encourage you to seek professional help. I am providing links below for you. One big reason that an abuse victim may be tempted to return to the relationship is to try again. It's very, very difficult to give up on a relationship that we have such a strong emotional attachment to and that we once had such high hopes for. It's not easy to just throw the whole thing away, especially after we've devoted perhaps years of our lives to this person. So of course we want to try again. There's so much to lose. Some of us have children with these people or lives that we've built with these people. Maybe we have our home tied up in this person and all of our friends and family are connected to this person. So it's very, very tempting to try again when there's even the slightest hint of a chance that maybe things will work. This can be especially difficult if the abuser is now promising us that they've changed, they've seen the light, they realize how cruel they've been, and they'll never act that way again, they promise. And they're finally saying all the things that we've been longing and waiting and begging to hear. It can be very, very tempting and easy to believe that finally we've gotten through to this person. And it kind of makes sense when we leave an abusive relationship and the abuser suddenly has a change of heart. It kind of makes sense. Like, oh, maybe me leaving is what finally got through to this person. Not the years of begging, pleading, crying, explaining for hours and hours, hours of pointless arguments, all the pain and drama. None of that had any effect on this person, but I finally gave up and left, and now they finally get it. Well, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? And it might make us feel like all of that time and pain and energy that we invested, maybe it wasn't a huge waste. Maybe now it'll finally work. So it's really, really tempting to go back when we've kind of convinced ourselves that this might be a good reason to give it another chance. But as I've said before in other videos, if it takes leaving or threatening to leave for somebody that is supposed to care about and love you to finally listen, to finally care at all about how you feel about things, to finally act like maybe now they will stop treating you so poorly, I mean, that really is not an indication of change. That's an indication of manipulation and desperation. Abusive people that suddenly lose control or gradually lose control of people that they once had control over become panicky and desperate, and they'll say anything. They will put on any kind of act. They will promise anything. They will do anything to regain control. Not to have you come back to them. It's not you they miss, it's the control that they miss. They're angry. No matter how loving they seem, no matter how sincere, no matter how sorry, they are angry that you have broken free or that you would dare think that you could break free of them. And all of the platitudes and the tears, maybe you're seeing crocodile tears and the promises and all that. Behind all that act is sheer rage and anger that you would dare think that you have the right to live without this person. So when you go back to somebody that would not listen or consider you until you tried to leave, you're almost certainly guaranteed to have the abuse escalate. So Keep that in mind if you are tempted to try again and you think that leaving is something that might convince the abuser to stop being abusive. It just virtually never ever works out that way. That's not how abusive people learn to stop being abusive. People that have a pattern of abusive behavior need a very, very long time to learn different habits. They need professional help usually to learn different habits. They're not going to suddenly stop abusing you because you finally left. That's not how it works. Another reason we might be tempted to go back to the relationship or to just engage with our abuser, to engage in a phone call even, or a text war, is an attempt to communicate. When we break free of an abusive relationship, it can take a very, very long time to let go of this desperate need to get our point across. Even after we've left this person in the rearview mirror, we might still feel compelled to try to get them to understand what they've done. It's really hard to accept that somebody can seemingly misunderstand you so greatly after you have tried so hard to make this relationship work. But this is a trick that narcissists use. They purposefully misunderstand everything you say because A, they don't care about the points you're making. They don't care how their behavior affects you other than how it controls you. They don't care if what they say and do hurts you. They care if they can keep you wrapped around their finger. So if they say something to you like, "You never listen to me. I'm tired of repeating myself 1,000 times." And you know that that is just not reality, that you always listen to them and that they never have to repeat themselves. It's just human nature to have like this compulsion to correct them, to try to right this wrong, to try to clear up this misunderstanding of, "What do you mean? I listen to you all the time." And they do this on purpose. In this particular situation, there was probably no thought given at all as to whether or not you listen. It's just that saying, "You never listen to me," gets you emotionally charged up. And now you are compelled to stay and try to convince this person that you do listen. And that's all they cared about. So when you break free of an abusive relationship, the abuser, the narcissist, doesn't want you to be free of them. They might not care if you're still with them. They might not care if you still live with them or spend time with them, but they don't really want you to move on and slip outside of their control. So if they can continue to misunderstand you in ways that keep you engaged in the relationship and keep you worked up and keep you upset and keep you trying to explain yourself, that's enough for them to feel like they still matter and they can still control your emotions and they're still a relevant person. And when you're recovering from trauma, a traumatic, abusive relationship, it's a really common thing that you can get caught in these loops in your head of rehearsing conversations, of trying to think of what to say to this person to get your point across, and just going in circles in your head. I've experienced this where these conversations can just run obsessively in your head for hours at a time, and it's very unpleasant and very, very difficult to stop. But if this is happening to you, don't let this fool you into re-engaging in the relationship, into thinking that you're somehow finally going to be able to get your point across, into thinking, "Oh, that's what I should say to him or her. That'll get my point across finally. That'll feel really good to say." Because I guarantee any kind of engagement you have with a narcissist is just going to go down those same rabbit holes, just going to turn into those same nonsensical, endless arguments that go nowhere and just frustrate you and just end up leaving you confused, very unsatisfied, frustrated. It's a huge waste of time. So don't let the urge and the temptation to try to get your point across trick you into re-engaging with a narcissist. Another reason that we might go back to a relationship or re-engage is to try to get some kind of closure. This is really, really difficult to move on without. Ending a relationship with a narcissist is something that can happen very suddenly. It can really feel like a real shock. And then often the narcissist tries to make us feel like we're the ones responsible for the destruction of the relationship. There can be absolutely no closure, the opposite of closure, because this person's come along and really kind of ruined our lives, done all kinds of things to completely upend our lives, and then they just disappear and leave us in the ruins of something that we really can't even wrap our heads around yet, trying to understand what just happened to me. And they're standing back and pointing and blaming us and telling us all the reasons that this is all our fault. And that's really, really hard to accept, because we're not only dealing with the pain and the grief of losing somebody that we had a lot of very strong emotional attachment to, but we also have to deal with the confusion and the lack of closure by being blamed for everything by the person that did this to us. So this can lead to a very strong temptation to try to re-engage with the narcissist in order to gain some kind of closure, to re-engage and try to explain things in a way that we hope will result in the narcissist acknowledging what they've done, taking some kind of accountability for it. And this is, of course, why there is no closure from a narcissist. Narcissists will always give us the opposite of closure, because they absolutely would rather die than take accountability for what they've done. And they really don't want you to have closure. They don't have any reason to give you any closure, because they don't care about your feelings. They don't care if you're lost in an emotional sea of emotions that you could barely function in. They don't care what kind of mess they've left you in. If anything, they kind of like it, because it gives them the upper hand. It gives them leverage over you, and it allows them to keep control over you. And that's what they really want. So they don't care about closure. They care about maintaining the drama, maintaining control, keeping it going. I mean, they're in this for how it makes them feel. And if it makes them feel important to keep you wrapped up in an emotional tornado, then that's a win for them. They're not going to help you end that. There's no reason for them to do that. And even if there was, it would cost them far too much to do so, because it would mean that they would have to take some blame for what they've done. And this can lead into another reason that we will go back to an abusive relationship, and that is to make the pain go away. Nobody but an abuse victim can understand how painful it can be to leave an abusive relationship. Sometimes leaving an abusive relationship is more of a relief than anything else, but sometimes it can be the most painful experience of your life, depending on how strong the trauma bond was, depending on what stage you were at in the relationship and how ready you were to be rid of it. Trying to let go and accept the end of an abusive relationship when you were trauma bonded and you were not ready to let go or end it can be indescribably painful. More emotional pain than a person can handle. The point where you can't feel any more pain. And I don't think anybody can really understand why or how this can be so incredibly painful without experiencing it themselves. It just is. It just is unbearably painful. And it can seem that the only way to end the pain is to go back to the relationship. And really, when you're really in the thick of it, it can seem like it actually makes sense. I mean, being in an abusive relationship is painful. It's traumatic, it's frightening, it's frustrating. It makes you feel like you don't matter. You're constantly walking on eggshells, you're nervous all the time. But of all that pain and discomfort, leaving an abusive relationship before you're ready can be 100 times more painful than living in the abusive relationship. So before you get over that hurdle of dealing with that pain and processing it and sitting in it, it can seem like it's not worth it for a little while. It can seem like, forget this, I'm going back to that relationship because at least I wasn't in this kind of pain when I was stuck in that abusive relationship. And I can totally understand why someone would do this, but as somebody that has made it out of that forest, I would just urge you to reconsider and remember that you are the only one that can really fight for yourself, and that there is an end to that pain, no matter how long it takes. And once that pain ends, you will thank yourself for keeping yourself out of that abusive relationship and resisting the urge to go back. But I just want to acknowledge that it can seem really tempting when we're in an enormous amount of pain and it seems like that's the only answer. And even for people that aren't in an enormous amount of pain having left the abusive relationship, they might be tempted to go back because they have fantasized and idealized the memory of the abusive relationship. It's really common to kind of forget the bad stuff or to focus on the good memories. And as I've said before, most abusive relationships start off really, really great, really awesome. There are a lot of things that happen in the beginning of most abusive relationships that just have our dopamine and our endorphins just going through the roof. I mean, we're on cloud 9, we're 100% infatuated. It's euphoric. It's like a drug high for some people. And then when things go south and the abuse starts to become more prominent and noticeable, and then the relationship ends, just like a drug addiction, it can be easy to forget about the reasons that you left, and it can be easy to start fantasizing about the way things were in the beginning and remembering those highs, those euphoric moments where we were just on top of the world. And it can be easy to get lost in that fantasy of thinking, oh, I'd really like to experience that again and go back there again. And of course, if we give in to this temptation, we can be quickly reminded as to why we left in the first place, which is another thing to keep in mind, that abusive relationships are almost always much worse than we remember them. Even right after we leave an abusive relationship, abuse is very, very confusing. We're constantly being gaslighted. We're constantly being told that our experience is not what it is, and that bad things that happen are our fault, and that we're making a big deal out of nothing. The abuser will put a huge emphasis on the good things they do for you, and they will minimize or even outright deny all the ways that they hurt and abuse you. And this can trick us into forgetting how bad things really are. And then there's something called abuse amnesia. And to be honest, I don't really fully understand how this works. I guess it's just a result of trauma and confusion and the enormous amount of stress that we're under when we're in an abusive relationship. But for whatever reason, it's really hard to really lay down reliable, accurate memories when we're living in an abusive relationship. So it's just the way our brains work, I guess, that it can be really difficult to remember, or it might just be remembered in these fragments or flashes, or in a way that we can't really articulate. And when we can't really explain articulately exactly the ways that we were abused, we can kind of start to forget why it was such a big deal, or how badly it made us feel, or how badly it affected us. I think this is why a lot of abuse victims develop the urge to start recording their conversations, which can be useful, but I also recommend journaling. And if you're fresh out of an abusive relationship, I really greatly encourage you to journal now the way that you feel about things and your memories of the things that have happened. Because as time goes by, you might really start doubting your own memories, or maybe not even being able to remember the things that happened, because it's such a blur in your head. And you wouldn't want this to turn into a reason that you go back and refresh your memory in a very unpleasant way. Outside all of these reasons that we might be tempted to go back to an abusive relationship are external reasons, like family and friends that are not supportive and or don't understand what we've been through, that will tell us things like, he's a really great guy, or she's a really great gal, or don't the kids need a dad, or don't be selfish, or nobody's perfect. Or maybe people that have actually endured ridiculous amounts of abuse themselves that now don't understand why everybody else in the world doesn't just stay in a terrible, horrible, miserable relationship. I think these people sometimes can be a little bit jealous or resentful of people that decide to walk out of a miserable situation. So they kind of project that onto you, like, well, I just stayed and I made things work. I don't run away from my problems. And there's all kinds of viewpoints and perspectives of other people's opinions on why you should stay in a terrible situation. And when you're lost and confused and very vulnerable and in a lot of pain, it can be really hard not to listen to these people. But of course, at the end of the day, you're the one that gets to decide what you do with your life, because this is your life. And I just don't think anybody should feel obligated to stay with somebody that makes them miserable and makes their life a living hell. And anybody that tries to convince you otherwise really doesn't care very much about your welfare. And then, of course, there are guilt trips that you can kind of put on yourself. It's easy to worry about how your kids are going to fare if you are to get divorced, if that's your situation. And I know that can be really difficult to reconcile, and you can feel really guilty about splitting up the kids' home. But I'm not telling anybody what the right or wrong decision is. I think every situation is different. But in my opinion, I think it's good to show children that if they are in a miserable situation, they have an option to leave. They don't have to stay in a terrible place where they're miserable and being treated like crap. I think it's good to show children that you don't have to stay with somebody that treats you like that. And I also think that if you separate yourself from an abusive relationship and you move on with your life and you're able to heal and develop stronger mental health, you're able to be a better parent. So that's my opinion on kids and divorce when it comes to abusive relationships. But of course, everybody's situation is different, so I would never want to tell somebody what they should or shouldn't do. I don't think that you should ever feel guilty for trying to protect yourself or your kids from an abusive environment. I don't think you should ever feel guilty for leaving somebody that treats you like crap. No matter how many other great things they've done for you, if somebody treats you like garbage, I don't think you should feel obligated to stick around. And of course, I think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes it's just not logistically possible to separate from a narcissist, and everybody's situation is different. Sometimes there's just really nowhere for you to go, or there's no way to support yourself, or there's just way too much pressure on you, or maybe you live in a place where you literally don't have a choice. And I do want to acknowledge that sometimes it's not that simple, or sometimes maybe a college student that's living with abusive narcissistic parents that just has one more year of college left, if they just live with their parents for one more year. I mean, should they leave if it's just one more year and it means graduating from college? I mean, I can't make that decision for somebody. Maybe for some people, depending on how bad it is, maybe that's worth sticking it out. But I do want to tell anyone out there that feels like they don't have a choice not to underestimate yourself and not to give up too easy. If you really want out, if you really want to break free, there's probably a way. There might be a lot of things that you have to give up, but don't underestimate how good it feels to break free of an abusive relationship, and how many things that can tie you into that relationship and make you feel stuck. Things that once you give those things up, they really weren't that great. They really aren't worth sticking around in an abusive relationship. I mean, of course you don't want to be homeless or anything like that, but maybe you don't have to live in as nice of a home. Maybe you don't need as many of the things that you feel like you're going to suffer without, because there's not much in this world that is worse than living with somebody that doesn't respect you. I really believe that most people that do whatever it is they have to do to get out of an abusive relationship will eventually thank themselves for doing all that incredibly difficult work. And I also want to say, for anybody that does go back to their abusive relationships, however many times they might do it, to be easy on yourself and not to beat yourself up, because this can be one of the most difficult things that any human being has to do. Staying away from an abusive relationship is not as simple and easy as people might think. It is one of the hardest things there is to do. It's very similar to a drug addiction. if not really the same thing. In my opinion, from my perspective, I would consider it an actual addiction. And I think that we need to forgive ourselves and not give ourselves excuses to go back to the relationship. But once we go back and make that mistake, to tell ourselves, it's okay, I messed up, but I'm going to start over and I'm going to break free again. Today's a new day, and don't let the bad decisions of yesterday weigh you down today, because this is something that you can do. You can resist the urge of going back. You can do this for yourself, because your life is worth living free of abuse. And even though I know this can be the most painful, difficult thing that a human being can ever have to do, it is worth it after you get through to the other side. And there is another side to this. And once you break free of an abusive relationship, no matter how much help and support other people might have for you, you are the only one that can stop yourself from going back. If you're looking for a way to support my channel and you've been considering professional therapy, BetterHelp is offering 10% off your first month of service if you sign up using the link below in my description. And if you sign up using the link below in my description, I get a one-time commission. So that'll help me out, and it'll help you out if that's something that you've been considering. I hope this helps. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and comment below any ideas you have for me for future videos. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you like this video and would like to see more like it in the future. Until next time, thanks. Bye.